Hello everyone. I'm happy to be back with you for the 22nd episode of my Sanibel Chronicles. For those who haven't joined us in the past, my name is Charles LeBuff, and I developed this podcast to share some interesting aspects about my life in Southwest Florida and more specifically on Sanibel Island. I've been away from the camera for several days. First of all, I was under the weather, but I've survived and I'm doing okay. And I also was recently commissioned to do another of my carvings of the famous Key Marco cat. This is my replication, another of my replications of the Key Marco cat. I guess over the past 40 years I've carved several dozen of these replications. This cat is made from Honduran mahogany. It's about the same size as the original that was found on Marco Island back in 1896 by an archaeological expedition led by Frank Cushing. And the real cat is still on display at the Marco Island Museum, I believe until April of next year. And if you haven't seen the original, by all means you should stop by and take a look at it. I've made, as I said, dozens of these, and I keep getting better. This one is now ready for final sanding and application of a finish. The Key Marco cat. Well, after that, I think this week I was going to, rather than do something that I had prepared because I really hadn't, I thought I'd do just a storytelling episode. And I picked out something that happened to me many, many years ago that, looking back, or even at the time, it was quite comical. In 1956, I started my career with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service at their Red Tide Laboratory that was located out at the Naples Airport. And on one particular morning, a co-worker and I named Bill Becker, Bill has been deceased for many years, we were assigned to tow a aluminum skiff from Naples up to Boca on Pine Island and launch the boat there at a boat ramp and go to several collection stations in northern Pine Island Sound, and one including at the center and the extreme middle of Boca Grande Pass. Now, if you're familiar with the waters of Southwest Florida, you know that the Boca Grande Pass is extremely deep. It's a wide pass. It's noted for its abundance of tarpon during the summertime tarpon season. Well, we got up to Boca, we launched the skiff, and we're going about our duty of collecting surface and bottom water samples. When we got out to the center of the pass, there was an onshore wind and an outgoing tide, and the water was really, really riled up. And just about that time, our outboard motor quit, and we couldn't get it restarted. So Boca Grande was closest to us, so after we realized that we couldn't get the engine started, we decided we'd row over to Boca Grande. So we did, and we got inside a little bay, and I believe there was a marina there. This is in the mid-50s now. called Miller's Marina. And we pulled up to the dock and tried to start the engine, but we couldn't. So we walked up into the marina office and told the gentleman that we were with the Fish and Wildlife Service, that our engine had quit. We couldn't get it started. Well, it was getting late in the day by then, and he told us that there were places to stay on Boca Grande, but we hesitated. So next we called the office. I called the office in Naples and explained our dire circumstances, and we were directed to stay on Boca Grande overnight. And the next morning, Tommy Wood, the refuge manager at Sanibel Refuge, would fly over in his seaplane, and it was decided he would pick me up, fly me over to Boca. I would get in the car and drive down Pine Island, around the Charlotte Harbor, through Punta Gorda, over to Placida, which is on the mainland opposite Boca Grande. The Boca Grande Bridge causeway was under construction, but it wasn't open. So the nearest place for me to go to try to find a pullout was Placida. So we next went back to the discussion with the marina manager, and we explained that we didn't have very much money between us, and we couldn't really pay for a motel room, much less anything to eat. This was going to be a one-day project, and back in Naples by at least by dark. So the next thing out of his mouth, he asked. I was talking at the moment, and he asked me, "What religion are you?" I thought that was pretty strange, since I wasn't really a churchgoer, and the last church I had been in was the Methodist Church in Bonita Springs. So I said, "I'm a Methodist." He said, "Okay, hold on just a little bit." So he went back in his inner office, I guess, to the telephone, and soon came back out and explained to us that he had made a phone call and someone would be by fairly soon to speak to us. So Bill and I waited, and not too long after that, a gentleman came into the marina and went over to the manager, and the manager brought him over to us, and it was explained that he was the minister of the Methodist Church on Gasparilla Island, where Boca Grande is located. And he asked us a few questions, and he made a phone call and came back and said, "Well, I've arranged accommodations for you, but you boys have to promise me that you'll go about paying this man for the rental rate after you're back home. You can send the money to him." And we both promised we'd do that. And then he pulled out of his pocket some cash. I've forgotten exactly how much he gave us, but he said, "This is for your dinner, and it should cover your breakfast." That is on my parishioners. I'm happy to help you fellows out. So we had accommodations, and we went to a small motel or cottage complex and spent the night. We went to a local restaurant and each had a hamburger. And the next morning we got something to eat. I've forgotten exactly where it was that we ate. And just after daylight, the seaplane from Sanibel arrived, picked me up, took me over to Boca, and I went around to, drove around after Tommy would drop me at Boca. I went around to Placida. When I got to Placida, Bill had decided he would not try to get over to Placida for at least an hour or so, because he knew it would take me quite some time to get to Placida. And lest I forget, there were no 4-lane highways in Southwest Florida at this time. US 41 was 2-laned, rough asphalt road that was actually very dangerous to drive, so you couldn't very well pulling an empty trailer do the speed limit. So it took me a while to get to Placida. So when I got there, I went to the first marina that I saw, and I went into the office and I explained what was going on. And when I told the man I wanted to use his ramp to pull our boat out, but I was unable to pay the 75 cents fee because we just didn't have the money. And when I told him I was with the federal government, well, he blew up. He started cussing the government every side, every which way, and using some prime language, and told me basically, no, we could not use his ramp to pull our boat. So that was very, very perplexing and rather frightening, because neither Bill Becker or I had been to Placida before. So about that time, I hung around, and Bill finally came. He had gotten the motor running and had powered over to Placida, and I told him the bad news. And we decided that I would drive along the road from Placida looking for a place to pull the boat, and not knowing if I'd find one or not. So I did. I drove slowly through the neighborhood, and I found nothing. And finally I came to a sign with an arrow, and the sign said Cape Hayes Marine Laboratory. So I said, heck, I'll go ahead and try there. So I drove in, and there was a small frame building, and in that building was the Cape Hayes Marine Laboratory director. Her name was Dr. Eugenie Clark, and she happened to be in that day. And I introduced myself and told her the plight that we had, and she was very sympathetic and told me that we could certainly use her boat ramp to pull out our skiff. So I waited out on the tiny boat basin she had there, chatting with her and waiting for Bill to arrive. He did, and we managed to pull the boat and get on our way. Now I've found a few old photographs here, and the first one is the Cape Hayes Marine Laboratory. And the Cape Hayes Marine Laboratory was a private organization, and a few years after 1956-57, it relocated to Sarasota, and we now know it as the Moat Marine Laboratory. And Dr. Eugenie Clark was one of the first directors of that facility. This is a photograph of her about the same time as this episode happened, of being marooned overnight on Boca Grande. Quite an unusual adventure, and rather a fearful experience, not knowing if we could get our boat on the trailer. So Bill and I managed to get back to the lab late that day, on our second day of a one-day collecting trip. And the first thing we both did, of course, was to send a check to the accommodations that were provided to us, and we each wrote a thank you note to the the Methodist Church minister. Characters in Southwest Florida were very forthcoming and gave their opinions, and I never had a chance to meet that gentleman again and thank him for his non-assistance. So that's my first visit to Boca Grande, and I've been back many times to the Boca Grande Lighthouse. So I hope you enjoyed that short story. Looking back, it was really a comical episode. I want to thank the new subscribers. It's essential that I build these subscription base and the likes on YouTube to help the channel grow. I think next week, I'll get back to something with more images to share and tell you some factual information on the subject matter. Thank you for tuning in. I appreciate it.